Hi, I'm Richard Wright, and welcome to the Digital DNA podcast, Digital Netizens Awaken. And today I'm joined by James Elston. James, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here today with you and talk about what I am most passionate about in my professional life, which has some crossover, I guess, into my personal life. But that is the world of brands.
Branding,
That
yes.
is, yeah, that is understanding brands in all of their glorious technicolor and detail. So really, I architect brands, have done for 20 years, either entire new businesses, products, services. So I develop and define the brands for those to launch to market and all the subsequent marketing and advertising activation that happens subsequent to the definition of that brand. And I also redefine brands and evolve brands depending on the state of business and the diagnosis.
Fantastic.
Essentially, a big part of my role is problems. We say in my business, 90% of the solution is finding the problem,
That's good.
and I believe that to be true. So
And,
yeah, that's what I've done for the last 20 years. Multiple agencies, client side, and currently work at WPP Network.
Fantastic. And I met James, who's now our head of marketing at My Digital Twin. I met you, 2017 or something? We were working in a marketing arm of a blockchain company.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is correct.
There were
That
some
is
there were some problems and some good things about that experience.
Yeah, I think we had a great brand. I
We
think
did.
we had
Fantastic.
we had a we had a mission. I think we had a purpose, and I don't mean in the way that we used to define purpose, as in some sort of radical, um, meaningful kind of approach to solve some sort of world problem. It doesn't need to be purposeful in that way. It just needs to be intentional and meaningful to the consumers and to the business, the people running it. And I think we had that. I think some of our issues were probably faced in how we went to market, but it's a story for another time.
And that was the market at that point too. I mean, people didn't really know what smart contracts were, right? We were just trying to
Mm,
figure out where all of this distributed ledger stuff was going. But it was great because it was the genesis for My Digital Twin. On previous podcasts, I talked about how we had been interviewing different people who were going to be ICOing on our platform there. And there was one company that I really loved their idea of a secure, super secure wallet. But that's all it was. It was just a secure wallet. And I
mm,
remember asking the president of the company later on, they weren't chosen to ICO. And I said, so you have this information and it's in what you call a pod and it's super secure. You say a quantum computer can't break into it. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, can you move it around in the pod? And he said, yeah. And I said, can you share it outside of the pod securely? Yep. So if you can move it and you can share it outside, can't you be rewarded for sharing it? And a big thought balloon went up over his head. And that's when we started this process. That's when it was in my mind that we should do this. And about a year later, I think I reached out to you and started to get this process going to get the company up and moving forward.
I mean, it's really interesting, kind of going back all that time, and I sort of fast forward to now, and I think that the idea of security and of privacy. I mean, we're talking about, I think the time has probably never been better in my mind. I think if I look at sort of human fundamental needs, I mean, even to reference Maslow's hierarchy, it seems there is a real underlying need at the moment, and I mean at a macro level, globally, culturally, to feel secure.
Yeah.
Safety, it's one of our primary needs, and right now I think the world seems like a pretty dangerous, unsafe place. And with that, and with the main catalyst and contributor to that being the digital and social sphere, as well as some, geopolitical aspects, should we say, that actually, what better place to help, and to provide that unmet need, which is broadly security and safety, but within the kind of the digital space where people are feeling so unsafe in the first place. So, and I see so many kind of signals, around that. I mean, I'm just in the UK, but we've just had a huge media outpouring over a series over here called Adolescence, which has taken its Netflix. You may have heard of it, but
I
it's
haven't
about
watched it yet. It's on my playlist. Yeah.
It's about the radicalization of young boys, over here in the UK, and people are, in discourse in the circles that I'm in. It's a really beautiful concept that I haven't heard before, but it's being sort of positioned as a cultural intervention, which is whereby there is an education that takes place through the stuff that we do, content, branded content, Netflix, commissioned content that actually does a job that you might have thought historically governmental bodies might have been doing, which is to educate parents on the dangers of social media and the dangers of, this ever expanding digital world that we all, and especially the youth, spend a huge amount of their time in, and it's incredibly dangerous. And this stuff isn't new. It's been going on for a while. It was incel culture was, a real problem, and the radicalization of the far right and misogyny and hatred, in America a way back, and all these things filter down, and we see Tate and other signals that are showing right now that the world feels for a pretty unsafe place. And what we need to do as businesses is, I think, we need to empower people. We need to help. We need to help parents, and we need to help children. And we need to, and it's both. It's a two-pronged thing, we need to help the guardians, educate them and keep them safe, and we need to help them educate the people that they look after, in order to keep them safe.
Before we get into how MDT plays in that, I want to talk a
Yeah.
little bit about Web3, because Web3 is fundamentally different than the internet that we're moving out of now. It's very decentralized, where the individuals have control.
From my understanding and exposure to Web3, really, it has been born out of a want to shift the power, the control, away from the sort of few who have, you might argue, I mean, you only need to look at, some of the recent pictures, and even in the UK, these are circling of Musk, of Bezos, of Zuckerberg, and, these few people corrupted by power and literally, playing out some sort of alpha male crisis on TV, that's incredibly toxic and dangerous. And you think, actually, this backlash, this counterculture, this sort of movement that we see that's happening around the fringes, but is swelling rapidly, is really in opposition to that. And I think that for the most part, bar earlier conversation that we had, Richard, that plays into a bit what I was talking about in adolescence, there is some radicalization of those that are most vulnerable. But for the most part, I think the general consensus is that things are not right. That is not right. That those didactic sort of, verging on dictatorship type mentalities coming from the top that poison the whole, the populace. And actually, the populace is rising up. And I think that this decentralized model allows for public consensus to take over. And I think mostly, human beings are well-intentioned and want to create a better future for themselves and their children.
I think you're absolutely right. And there's great opportunity to do that. And I think people realize that something's wrong in the present internet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Big tech is basically taken control of everything. You accept cookies and give away everything you have for access. So it's fundamentally wrong. So I think it's up to us, though, to educate people that there's a better way, you know? They know that something's wrong, but they don't know how to fix it. They don't know what the solution is. And I think Web3, through its ability to be decentralized, gives people their power if it's done right. But in the present Web3, again, I'm seeing that the big tech firms are buying all of the startups. They're starting to own everything. They're starting to control a lot of this. So I'm not sure if we don't fight back soon that we won't lose the opportunity to offer a new decentralized internet to the people. My question to you is, brand is crucial. This is your expertise in Web3 as it's developing, and it's been going for a while, and it's coming. It's already here in some parts. How do you build a brand in Web3? How do you get through all of the noise to let people know that there is an issue and there's actually a solution?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question to ask, because generally speaking, a brand is it is the emotional space, if you like. I like to think about it as the emotional space that you occupy in someone's mind. It's a feeling.
Yeah.
At the most simple level, and there are lots of different ways to create those feelings, but really a brand is a story. It's a point of view. It's a point of view on the world that gives birth to having some sort of meaningful intention. And in Web3, it's a more complex area, because in a fully decentralized organization, I think that in the way that I create brands for corporate companies, there is a certain ability to be able to govern a single-minded brand narrative and story that allows us to emotionally connect with our audience, and therefore open them up to want to know more about the functional aspects that we're offering, our propositions, our products, our services. I think in Web3, it's a trickier space, because if you look at a totally decentralized model, you don't have just one story. You don't have a singular point of view. You don't have a singular, meaningfully different proposition to bring to the world. You have multiple. So I think for me, probably the holy grail in order to do good is in some sort of hybrid mechanism, some sort of hybrid operating model that allows for a singular, consistent, unchangeable point of view and meaningful intention that creates a feeling of positivity, or I don't know, liberation within people, that people can get behind, that can galvanize people, and that people can then, in a decentralized way, contribute to that. I think that that's probably where I see the first breakthroughs coming within Web3. I think totally decentralized it kind of moves and shifts, and I think the story can change too much for the regular people, the ones who are not the innovators and the early adopters. It's difficult to trust when a story is fluid and constantly changing. I think that we're in a business of creating frequency, consistency, and exposure. And in doing that, we're able to build the memory structures and the emotional resonance that remains consistent over time, and that breeds trust. And in a space that is, very untrustworthy, I mean, I think this is the problem that people have, all these new solutions, 2-bit solutions that don't really have a clear brand definition, don't really have a clear, meaningful intention in the world, are difficult to trust in and of themselves. And now we're seeing, huge distrust of the big tech companies that you talk about. So the question is, who can you trust? And I think that it's probably a combination of a certain number of people who are creating a vision that they are able to buy into, and then the people contribute and help build that vision together. And that is the co-creation that I think we're looking, the collaboration that I think we're looking for. And in doing that, I think that people will be able to see that this thing isn't changing, that this thing doesn't revoke, or go back on its DEI, or it doesn't revoke or go back on, pride and Black Lives Matter. I think these things are incredibly damaging because, the people that are supposed to be looking after us and the authority figures and the figures of trust that are making promises ultimately hold for nothing at the moment.
What I think is really important here is, to your point on how you have to create trust in Web3. And I want to ask you, how did you create the brand values and the vision for My Digital Twin? What was your thought process for that? And can you actually talk about those values and that brand concept?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that ultimately the values were born out of a higher level mission, a higher level philosophy, a higher level vision for MDT, which serves a greater purpose. And then, in defining what it is that we believe, which for me is the very first thing that any company needs to define. I believe that companies that just define their purpose is like, well, how can you have a purpose unless you have a clear point of view or an ethos on the world? Surely one precedes the other. And for us, it was very much leaning into the groundswell that we were talking about earlier, which was shifting the power dynamic, which was shifting the power that is being abused by the big tech companies into the hands of the people that actually, in the first place, should own, their data, which arguably is the most valuable asset that every single human being has on this planet, away from, their physical manifestation, their health, should we say. And that actually it should be up to them as to whether they share it and who they share it with, and be rewarded for sharing it. So in essence, it was born as an exact antidote to the corruption that we see from the big tech companies, which is of course the exact antithesis to that, which is they will take our data and they will take it for free, and then they will monetize it for their own benefits. And so really, if we, when we became clear that, that was our ethos and that was what we were doing, was to create a fairer digital world for the people that inhabit it versus those that kind of provide the infrastructure for it, that the values almost would write themselves, which is one, justice. I think this our brand at its very core is about justice. If we're about creating a fairer world, then there must be a more just there must be a more just way for the digital world to operate. If the social and societal fabric of the globe operated in the same way as the digital economy, especially when it comes to data, there would be uproar. People were going around stealing other people's clothes, bodily parts.
I agreed, but this is the fundamental issue here. People don't even know that they don't have their data because they've never had it. They don't even know that they could own it. If you ask somebody, do you own your data? They say, what are you talking about? They don't own digital data, and they don't own it. They have to give it away for accepting access to a website through a cookie. They don't know that they could own it. And if they don't own it, they certainly can't control it because they don't own it. They don't know that they could be rewarded. They don't really know what's happening with their data. I mean, it's starting to become better known now, and people are signing up to VPN services so they're not tracked and traced. But They're not really being rewarded for that. There's a couple of websites that do reward if you watch ads, but it's not what we're talking about at all. So how do you break through? How do you convince people or even educate them that this is something that they need? Because they don't even know they don't have it.
I feel we're at a precipice on this. I feel like, even 1 or 2 years ago, there was much less awareness around how, people's data is used. And I think there is a growing awareness of that. But for a long time, like you say, the sort of GDPR and the cookies and all of these various things were happening, and people just saw it as like, oh, I need to click this to get into the website that I want to see. I don't think people gave it a second thought. Because ultimately convenience is a priority, and we have seen I've seen in many different scenarios across many different categories. It's amazing what people will give away or will turn a blind eye to, or when there is something that might potentially inhibit, which causes friction, shall we say, in their day-to-day experience, and whether that's browsing the internet or whether that's shopping in a supermarket. Ultimately, we are programmed for survival, which means we want to make decisions quick, and we want to make them as easily and with as least mental cognitive effort as possible. So when this whole world, sort of started to change, and these various pop-ups, started coming, I just don't think people had the time or the patience or the energy to work out what it meant for them. And as long as it was working, oh well, it's fine. And now I think we're starting to see some awareness. But like you say, there's a huge education job to be done, and it's got to come from somewhere. And with that, I think that if people really understood what was happening with their data, I think they'd be pretty shocked. But therein lies the solution. It has to be and that's what we are aiming to, obviously, to create here at MDT, which is something that is as frictionless and is, if not easier, than what people currently experience in their day-to-day browsing and their day-to-day digital lives. And I think once we crack that, and I think we have plans in place, the technology is what will ultimately resolve this or provide a solution, is that we'll be able to give people a better experience, and actually they'll be able to they'll be able to keep hold of their data and be rewarded and be in control and be rewarded for sharing it. I think we saw this sort of thing happening with climate change, and then when we saw all brands going sustainable, sentiment is, yes, I want to help climate change. Yes, I want to reduce my plastics. Yes, I want to. But actually, those intentions, unfortunately, fall flat. There's a dissonance when we see actually the action behind those things. Actually, if it gets in any way, shape, or form, or provides any sort of further administrational burden, shall we say, or in fact a price premium, people are out. People aren't bothered, and that's something we need to lean into. That's something we need to look at. We want to make it easy, if not easier, as it is for the big techs to take it in the first place.
Yeah, and we have to make it compelling that it's something that they never knew that they needed, but they can't live without, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I honestly think that it is something that they will benefit from tremendously. Right? I think the way that big tech is taking things now, it's just not right. I don't want my information taken by third parties, right? I want to be in charge of that information. And it's changing rapidly. When we started this a few years back, the technology didn't exist. And now we're starting to see authentication, true verification of data It's still in the beginning stages, but it's happening now. So I think our timing is perfect, right? But in a Web3 environment, it's still greenfield. So that's why MDT is here.
It is, and I think we're on. You know, I agree. I think the time is right. I think there are many businesses that are coming into play within this area. I think that many tech businesses that rise and fall very quickly, who manage to capture huge amounts of data, are only eroding the trust that people have. You know, I was reading about recently a huge tech company that was doing DNA, and it goes bust. What happens to all that data once that company goes bust?
Yeah.
You know, that data is sold. There's nothing people can do about it. So, you know, there are so many issues that we face. And then we've got the advent of AI. You know, I think one of the biggest, probably most radical shifts of certainly of my time, is seeing slowly Google it turn to ChatGPT it. You know, our single source of information and single source of truth is potentially no longer Google or Bing. You know, it actually shifts, and it shifts over to, you know, ChatGPT or Prosperity or Perplexity or whatever other, you know, Gemini or Claude, you know, and I think that when that starts to happen, then what becomes really interesting is then, well, what are the algorithms for the AI, you know, and where and how does AI use our data, and which data is AI pulling from? And I was reading the other day, ChatGPT. We don't know much about how the algorithm works, but it's aligned to Bing. It's not even Google. And you just think, wow. So, you know, if you want to show up when someone types into ChatGPT, which, by the way, I see many of my friends do who are not in the tech space, but they want to know something and they know they'll get a better answer than they would do on Google, and there will be less advertising and the sources will be listed.
Sure.
They're going on to ChatGPT to do it. And you think, well, that is, you know, it's another huge kind of area that opens up, I think, for us, and a big education job, you know, potentially an opportunity for us to be able to go, hey, this is what's happening, you know, this is what this shift means. And yeah, like SEO for AI, you know, it's like it's kind of mind-blowing, right? And it's not just SEO of businesses, it's SEO of us as people.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah, it's really interesting, a really interesting time, and perhaps the advent, you know, and the exponential growth of these AI agents and bots is going to make people again take a bit of a, you know, a pause and go, okay, things are changing. What does this mean? And I think they're often good moments, you know, when there's a punctuation, when things start to shift from one thing to another, to be able to breathe into that punctuation as a force for good and as a force for reconsideration and reappraisal of how people are behaving online and what that means.
And that seems to fit into your ethos you mentioned earlier, that you believe most people are good. And I think that's true, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really true. So yes, sure. Is AI going to destroy the world? Well, maybe. I don't think so. I think it might be people that use AI to do that. But well, let's hope not. But I do think there's great personal advantage. And you're right. The SEO of AI could work. In my digital twin, we basically are the value. Each person has unique intrinsic value, the value of their personal data that's secure, that they control. They don't have to share their identity with anybody when they share their data. So they're held behind an avatar. It's private. It's the way it should be. You own your data, you control your data, you can share it or not. If you share it, you're rewarded, and you do it in privacy. Now, if you can tie an AI option into that with Toby, we talked to Toby, our CTO, last week. He's a genius from Switzerland. I think, he'll like to hear that, but it's true. I think we have a tremendous opportunity to build something incredible here. And we're doing that right now. So we are looking for investors. And part of having James here, James is our CMO, and we wanted to have him here because he knows brand. He's the head of brand and marketing, and he understands this area, as you can hear from his description today. So we'll be continuing to talk about the different people we have in My Digital Twin who are helping to make this a reality. So if you're interested in following us, please do at mdtwin.com.
The time is right. We want, outside of the digital space, we want to feel secure and we want to feel safe. But actually, we also want that in the digital and the social space. And actually the two are totally interconnected.
Yeah.
And I think that showing, providing that connection and showing that actually people can feel safe. And that there are two of us, there is us, and then there is our My Digital Twin, and the inner and the outer. It's verging on a spiritual ethos. It's my inside and my outside versions both need to be healthy because they rely on each other and they both need to be safe.
That's
So
beautiful.
I really hope that we can make that a reality.
Well, James, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay. See you.
Speak soon. Bye-bye.
And if you're an investor, reach out and we're happy to talk to you because there's opportunity to join us in our quest to make this a more fair internet.